From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. As you might imagine, my social media algorithms have long since figured out that I'm interested in content around the subject of optimism. That's not a tough one to figure out. And when a podcast called Optimist Economy popped up in my feed, I had to find out more. And that's how I discovered Kathryn Ann Edwards. Kathryn is a labor economist, an independent policy consultant, and co-host of the Optimist Economy podcast. You'll learn more about her background shortly, but the bottom line is she knows her stuff. Just a couple of weeks before this episode drops, she testified in Washington before the Tax Committee of House Ways and Means. Now I'll offer a heads up. Frequent listeners of Blue Sky know that we generally don't talk politics here. But in this episode, Kathryn offers strong opinions about what she thinks our government should be doing differently. I debated whether this content would work here and decided that it does. Optimist Economy takes its name from the idea that even when things aren't going the way you'd like, an optimist believes there's something to be done about it. And that's what Kathryn Ann Edwards is all about. So you might either agree or disagree with her ideas and suggestions, but I think we all should respect and be inspired by her tenacity and ability to speak up where she sees opportunities for us to be better. So with that content advisory, I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Kathryn Ann Edwards as much as I did. Kathryn Edwards, welcome to the Blue Sky podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's terrific to have you on. I've had a behavioral economist on before, but not a straight up economist. And I'm just curious to know, I'm always interested to know how people get where they got. And were you always, as a kid, were you into numbers? Were you into money? Were you into, how'd you get into economics?
No, not at all. So you had a behavioral economist. I'm a labor economist. So I study workers, the workplace, earnings, labor force participation, the people in our economy. No, I had no inclination of being an economist, even through college. I, growing up, and still to this day, am a massive history buff. Absolutely love history. And when I was in high school, I got the notion that I wanted to be a diplomat. I wanted to be like Madeleine Albright. And in college, studied, I went to UT Austin, and it has a major that's just government. It's not public affairs. It's not public policy. Or political science. It's just government. And so I studied, I was interested in kind of South America and Eastern Europe, former Soviet bloc. And so I took Spanish and Russian. I took a lot of Latin American government and Eastern European government. And then I had to take one stats econ class. And the professor was an economist who was like, I think you would be good at this. And I was like, I don't think so. It sounds hard. I want to go talk places. And after graduation, I moved abroad. And I hated it. I really hated living abroad. I didn't like being far from my country, from my family. And I had studied abroad before, but going on like a trip with 12 new best friends is very different from living by yourself in another country. And I just didn't realize how little I would enjoy it. So that was a bit of an abrupt thing to learn at 22. But I came back to the US, really terrible time to do it. It was in the summer of 2008. And that same professor who had encouraged me to be an economist, I came back and he said, you could still do this. And I applied for a lot of jobs in the economics research and policy and advocacy space. And I got one. And I moved to DC to take a job at an economic think tank, the Economic Policy Institute. And from there, I, had to take math classes at night in order to be competitive for a PhD program admission. But 4 years later, 4 years after graduation, I found myself back in school, getting a PhD economics. And if you had told me I was doing that on graduation day, I would have laughed in your face. I mean, I would have laughed in your face, like doubtful.
I actually appreciate hearing that because I think I know from raising kids, my kids are 31 and 29 now, and a lot of young people just think they have to have it figured out. This is what I'm going to do when I graduate and for the rest of my life. And the more people I talk to, the more you realize it just doesn't generally go that way.
And as a labor economist, I can tell you the labor research also points to the first 15 years of your career, first 10 really, or first 15. It's really about you learn what you like and what you're good at. And college doesn't necessarily help with that. It changes the type of jobs that you take, but what gets you on a good career path and what gets you high earnings is movement. It's you try out a bunch of stuff. The first 15 years of your career is associated with a lot of job switching, and that's good because you're learning about yourself. And so the pressure to be on a path is very much like a vibe from education, because so much of education is path dependent. You have majors, you have to have prerequisites. It's 1, 2, 3. But in the labor market, the path is the one you make.
That's great advice. I also think those first 15 years or so is a time to figure out what kind of people do I want to work with. What's a good boss? What's a bad boss? Because I always tell people, you could like the industry, you could they might have great health benefits and everything else, but if your boss is a jerk or unethical or whatever, nothing's worth it. So you started Optimist Economy, which is not just the podcast I've learned in my research. It's also sort of a nonprofit media entity. And one of the things that got my attention, obviously the word optimist, but juxtaposed or adjoined to economy. Tell us about the origins of that name and why you would call something like you're doing Optimist Economy.
Yeah. Do you want like the long personal story or like just the optimist story?
Well, like the long personal one is probably kind of interesting.
Well, I finished my PhD and I was working at the Rand Corporation. I had been there for about 4 years, and Rand was a great place to work. It wasn't a great fit, but it was a great place to work. And I was in this kind of what do you do career moment when the pandemic happened. I wrote my dissertation on unemployment insurance. And unemployment insurance is something that nobody cares about until there's a recession. And this is the largest recession the US has seen since the Great Depression in terms of the number of people who had lost their jobs. And the program had become, the most important one in the US, kind of toolbox. Well, not that many people know a lot about unemployment insurance. It's a very neglected program. And the way that I would explain it kind of to listeners is if I were to say, everyone who's an expert on Medicaid, we're all going to get together and go to a conference and talk about Medicaid, you'd fill hotels. It would be, you could take over a city. If I were like, hey, everybody who's a deep expert in unemployment insurance, let's get together. It's like, we're in a back room where there's truly not that many of us. So I was catapulted from obscurity to, I spent weeks of the pandemic where all I did was talk to journalists, explaining unemployment insurance, what was happening in the labor market. And it opened a ton of doors that, it took me a minute to have the confidence, but I eventually walked through them. Doors like becoming a columnist for Bloomberg, and doors like turning that phone around and filming myself talking about things, not just filtering my advice through journalists calling me about stories. So, in 2024, I had started my own consulting practice. I was writing for Bloomberg. I was making video content, and I had been told by a producer of a podcast that I was on, you really need to start your own podcast. And the theme was always going to be the same, but I think the delivery was going to depend on what type of policy environment we were in. Either, Harris wins and it's about making the good policy better, or Trump wins and it's about letting Americans know the good policy is out there and we can still have it. And so the tone of the show was going to depend so much on, what the objective was at the time, like convincing the American people that whatever policy Harris was about to embark on was going to work, or, comforting the American people that whatever policy Trump was going to embark on, there is still a good economy ahead of us. Because either way, the North Star is America's best economic era is in the future. So the show Optimist Economy really came out as, I had thrown about a ton of ideas. I'm not a word person, I'm an economy person, but I landed on Optimist Economy because I felt like it was the starkest, truest declaration of what Americans needed to know through, kind of the increasingly dark economic era that we're living in, which is that optimism about the economy is absolutely possible. And it's important.
Kathryn makes some interesting points about careers here and suggests that the first 10 to 15 years after school should be for sorting out what you like and are good at, as opposed to simply following the path toward which your school and/or your major is pointing you. For Kathryn, her post-college career made some zigzags until the COVID pandemic created a premium for people like her who are experts on, of all things, unemployment insurance. This led her to become a Bloomberg columnist, and things took off from there. Getting back to what I said in the open about politics, Kathryn makes it clear that her preferred candidate did not win the most recent presidential election, but she's used that outcome as an opportunity to share ideas that she thinks would serve the American economy and its citizens, expressing her views with an optimistic belief that America's best economy is in the future. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted Kathryn to talk about the current job market and how it will or won't be impacted by AI. She explained that our economy has been slowing since the Federal Reserve raised interest rates coming out of COVID.
What is happening in the labor market right now as the economy is slowly slowing down is a freeze of mobility. Like imagine like it's a like you can imagine the wheels are churning and that churning is just slowing down. A slowing down of labor market churn really hurts young people. They benefit from a fast hiring environment. We have had hiring rates equivalent to the nadirs of past recession for 2 years. So for people looking for their first job, it is a recession. At the same time, one of the benefactors of the economy has been the exuberance over AI investments. The Magnificent Seven, as we refer to the group of 7 companies who are taking the stock market to new heights, and the amount of investment that they're putting in. This has caused people to link them together. Right? AI is strong. AI investments are carrying the stock market. The labor market is weak. The labor market is hurting young people. Ergo, they're related, and AI is hurting young people. There is almost no evidence that these are causally related. They're happening in the same economy, but the reason for a slowdown in hiring is absolutely because we've raised interest rates and we've pursued destructive economic policies, and not because of AI. But because they're happening at the same time, we want to think that they're causally related, and they're not. That's the short term. You are suffering from a weak economy and poor economic leadership. You are not suffering from AI. Over the long term, we have really good understanding of how technology is incorporated into businesses really, really slowly. If I were to show you productivity in the US economy, which is the amount produced per worker, it is very steady. I mean, it is almost a linear, it's about as a straight line as you can get for raw economic data, which means the advent of computers, the advent of the internet, the idea that we used to send paper memos around an office and now it's an email, right? None of that leads to a step increase of productivity because firms, while they do adopt technology, are really slow to do it. And they don't do it in a way that sees immediate job loss. So AI will take jobs. 100% AI will take jobs, just like machines took jobs, manufacturing improvements took jobs, computers took jobs, the internet took jobs. We are in an economy that is constantly producing obsolescence. So yes, AI will take jobs. There's the only people who will tell you it will do so in a dramatic or stark or rapid or cataclysmic way are people who work at AI companies who benefit from that narrative.
How do they benefit from that narrative?
Well, it's like they're making AI really important, right? They're push. It's like a cliff of like AI is the future. Every company in the future will be an AI company. If you don't have AI, you won't be part of the future. You'll just be part of the job loss. Therefore, you should probably invest and try out AI in your own company. Or right, it's very much building up this boogeyman that if you're not on board, you'll be left behind. When in fact, most companies are very slow to adopt workplace technology because it often costs a lot of productivity in the near term.
And it seems in the past, technologies beget new jobs that never existed before. We didn't have these IT departments in companies in the old days. Or you've probably seen these charts, and I'm going to get it wrong, but for example, like ATMs are going to gut the banking industry because you're not going to need all those people in the branches. And if you look at bank employment in the years since ATMs came out, things like that you think are just going to gut these industries, they just don't, and new jobs get created. So that's helpful to hear.
You don't miss typists. They're gone. But we created new jobs. The economy is constantly moving forward, and that's really, really good. It's good that we're innovating. It's good that we're adopting new technology, that we're incorporating it into the workplace. People lose jobs and people gain jobs. I have maintained that the only thing that makes technology scary is how absolutely cruel America is to unemployed people. And that is not a function of technology. That is a function of judgment and poor economic choices. And there's nothing about technology that says we have to basically shove unemployed workers out the door and do as little for them as possible. That is a policy choice. That is not like AI means we can't help people. We've just decided not to help unemployed people.
Okay, so that's a good bridge to a question I've been wanting to ask. Because if I understand one of your driving philosophies, it's that one of the challenges we have as a country, the United States, is that we tend to put too much value on our own economic well-being and not on policies that will help lift everybody. Is that fair to say? Is that describe it sort of not necessarily just selfish, but it's sort of we like policies that are going to help us, and we don't do a good job of getting our head around policies that are good for the society at large. Is that a fair way to describe it?
I think that's fair. It's even less of the things we like. It's almost like how we assess it. Like, is this a good policy? It doesn't affect me. So we tend to think of economic investments as good when they flow through me, and bad and not as important, or just costly and expensive, or not as effective when they don't flow through me.
Right. Yeah, or flow through me, or maybe benefit. So my wife was on a school board in a town we lived in up in Maine, and every year when the budget came out, you had older folks in town or younger people who didn't have kids, and justifying spending money on the school just didn't make sense to them. And who did? When I was a kid, we had but the parents with kids would almost go the opposite extreme, and it was hard to explain to both sides why the spending made sense. And by the way, your property is more valuable now that you have these great schools, even though your kids aren't in it. That seemed to me a very small example, but it's sort of emblematic of what happens with a lot of the choices we have to make.
Yes, and I think that the selfishness that you see, or this not even self-centered, me first, I think in a lot of ways it's really excusable because our economy has produced more and more economic insecurity. And I don't say this in like an arrogant way. I say it in a genuine way. A consequence of economic security is that you get white-knuckled afraid about change when you don't know what it'll look like, and the idea that it could cost you something but not benefit you, right? You have got you are not secure. That means that it is very, you don't take a philosophical view on investments in children because you are at the edge of I cannot afford this. And I think a lot of Americans are very much find themselves, if not at the brink, a lot closer to the brink than they'd ever thought they'd be over the, inflation spike of the last 4 years. And that's understandable that makes them short-sighted to the benefits of broader economic investment. But yeah, I mean, you can tell that Americans are not good at understanding the benefits of economic investment by just how little we invest in children. It's criminal to some degree, but you'd say, well, why don't we spend money to take children out of poverty? And the first 5 responses will be, not with my tax dollars. That's their parents' fault. It's not my job to pay for somebody else's children. They should be working instead. Like you just hear this very uninteresting, almost cruel roll call of why I shouldn't help a child in need. That's a great way of thinking about kind of broader problems in how we pursue or have pursued economic policy.
As a history buff, Kathryn looks back at trends in the past to get a sense for how things could look in our future. She gives helpful data and examples here about why she thinks AI will disrupt the labor market, but not at the speed or scope that AI companies might lead you to believe. She also describes a precarious position that's caused when the economy slows. So many people are on the financial brink that it's hard for them not to be short-sighted when it comes to policy, including spending more dollars on children. Getting back to our conversation, Kathryn talks some more about why she thinks we'd benefit from spending more of our resources on children in this country.
All right, this is America. Your income as a kid predicts a lot about you. We are a country that has very different paths depending on whether you come from money or not. And we have almost every outcome you can look at for a kid is improved by their parents having income. So your readiness when you start kindergarten, your health when you turn 18, your scores on the SAT all have high correlations with income. So the idea that we would have a system in place that prevents families from earning income is, it's not just inefficient, there's a real cruelty to it because we know that America values income and that income is important for children, and yet we make earning income a privilege. Why? I mean, why would we make it a privilege for people to earn income from their families? Like, I want to put my kid in childcare, have a career, and have more money and take them on vacation and put them and save for college. I want to use income to invest in my children, but I'm not allowed to because there's no childcare that I can afford or there's no childcare in my area. Thinking of making income a privilege for me makes clear just what's at stake. And then, as an economist, I would say, look, you can't work and caregive at the same time. If you want workers, you want childcare. So which is it going to be?
So as a labor economist, could you show a plan where public spending on childcare would move the economy forward or enhance earning potential or all the things that a labor economist would study?
Oh, sure. I mean, we have decades of research that shows, I think, a very simple lesson. If you put kids somewhere safe and free between 8:30 and 5:30, the parents earn more and work more. So it would both generate more workers in our economy and it would generate more earnings for those workers. And you can see that on a marginal level, whereas say like half day to full day, you can see it from when someone gets no care to free care. You put kids somewhere safe, their parents earn more money. And that is ultimately very beneficial to the children, to the family, to the local community, to the economy. And I think one example that really strikes is New Haven, Connecticut lost a lawsuit about preschool. And they had to open up their preschool system to a lottery. And that year of preschool, it was full day, it was free, and then it was distributed via a lottery. So there's going to be people who wanted it that didn't get it randomly. Well, that's a great thing for economists to study. What is the causal impact of having a place to put your kids for free for a year? What they found was not only did parents who ended up with a kid accepted to preschool, this is 1 year of pre-K, not only did that lead them to have higher earnings in that year, the year their kid was in pre-K, it led to higher earnings for another 7 years, because earnings in our economy, our labor market is pretty path dependent in how earnings progress. So you earn more this year, you're going to earn more in 5 years. So the accumulated effects of 1 year of preschool, when you look at the overall economy, I mean, it's like 10 or 15 to 1 in some cases, depending on, especially if someone was really low earning and how much they earn afterwards. That takes the amount of money you have to spend on public programs, because people are less likely to be eligible for them when they're earning higher income. That puts tax dollars into state coffers. That puts money into local economies. And that helps children have more investments. The problem is that on every single cost scenario, everybody wins except that the government has to pay for it. So from the government's perspective, none of the benefits that accrue to the economy are worth it, because they have to pay for it in the case of children. Even though the investment itself, I mean, there is no question how much our economy would benefit from childcare via effects on the worker, on earnings, on labor force participation, on the kid, on money spent in the communities. The only loser from public childcare is that the federal government has to bear the cost, or the public sector has to bear the cost, and that's why they don't want to do it. Their own margins matter more than successful economic investments, which is why the current situation is so terrible. It's so funny because we don't really think of the lack of good childcare and access in terms of what it cost us, but we can all feel it. We just can't put it into the same type of terms that the government can. But I want to make something really clear. Federal childcare is not that expensive, and that government can absolutely afford it. Right now, the one big beautiful bill that passed in the summer of 2025, signed on July 4th, included a roughly $4.5 trillion tax cut over 10 years, which is about 10 times the size of a federal childcare program. You could even say that childcare, universal 0 to 5 free childcare, would likely cost somewhere between $50 and $100 billion a year. Okay. So that means that the $450 billion a year tax cut we just passed is somewhere between 5 to 10 times more what a childcare system would cost. So for the amount of money that the US just passed in a tax cut, you could have a universal childcare system and just stack it. Here's one, and here's another, and here's another, and here's another. And you can afford minimum of 5 universal free childcare systems for the price of the tax cut we just passed. And it is worth noting that is our 5th multi-trillion tax cut this century. 2001, 2003, 2012, 2017, and 2025, we have passed, in the way the government cost it, over $12 trillion of tax cuts. So when we say we can't afford childcare on the federal level, it's because we don't want to pay for it.
I knew you knew a lot about this. Now, a question though, in the New Haven example, because you said federal a few times, would a place like New Haven, is that essentially universal pre-K? So it's part of the school district. So a lot of it's paid for by the city of New Haven, or how does that work?
No, in New Haven's case, it wasn't universal. They didn't have enough spots.
But was it offered by the New Haven school district?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the states and localities across the country, in the pandemic, when you saw childcare collapse in Maine, it collapsed all over the country. And the federal government sent billions of dollars. Not billion. Yeah, billions of dollars to help with, I had the exact amount in front of me, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But they basically gave states money and said, do not let childcare collapse in your state. Here is a blank check. Spend it on childcare. You can spend it on workers. You can spend it on owners. You can spend it on capital developments. You can spend it on voucher subsidies. Do not let childcare collapse in your states. States sucked that money up really quickly, spent it very effectively, and then the money turned off. And what you see in the years since is that states are desperate to maintain that investment. And most of them are experimenting with some type of means of spending more money on childcare because they saw how beneficial it was, but they simply do not have the capacity to do so. They don't have a federal income tax. They don't have the purchasing power of the federal government.
Right. And the schools already are struggling financially. So adding another.
Yeah, there's a gentleman's agreement of sorts that if something is too expensive, the federal government pays for it because states just don't have that type of money in their budgets the way that the federal government does. They don't borrow the same way. They can't make the same type of capital investments that a debt issuer like the federal government can. And unfortunately, the federal government has chosen not to. So states are trying to get creative and making expansions. But the only state that can make a fully expanded foray into childcare is the one that has a permanent fund.
Right.
New Mexico.
New Mexico?
Yeah.
Has a permanent fund?
New Mexico has a permanent fund from oil and mineral deposits and extraction.
Interesting. The only state.
They're not the only state that has an oil and mineral deposit fund, but they're one of the few states that has an oil and mineral deposit fund that they voted and amended their constitution to spend at least part of that fund on childcare, and then the rest they're going to make up from general reserves or general revenue.
I did not know that. When making the case for offering financial support to working parents, Kathryn makes an interesting argument, saying that we live in a country that places a high value on income, yet we set policies that make it harder to earn income. Parents do better in the workforce, she says, when their children are somewhere safe. Now, for a more direct conversation about optimism, let's listen to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Kathryn Ann Edwards. So hearing you discuss these things, Kathryn, I think I have a better sense of why Optimist is in the name of what you're doing, because you're saying we do have, at our core, we have a great economy. We have a lot of resources. It's just thinking about being optimistic about what we could unleash if we spent them in ways that you think would be more strategic, smarter, helping more people. Is that fair?
I mean, the other way we put it, a little bit more sarcastically.
More eloquently.
No, I think more sarcastically is like sometimes optimism just comes from that low bar. And if I'm thinking of low bar, I'm thinking
those who expect nothing shall not be disappointed. That's what my wife.
But I mean, we have said that the reason to be optimistic about the future of the U.S. economy is just how little we've done to make it good for workers or American households over the past 25 to 45 years. I mean, we don't have paid sick days. We don't have paid family leave. We have a minimum wage that has been eroded to nothing. We don't regulate the labor market. We don't regulate hiring markets. We don't help the unemployed. We don't invest in children's care. We hardly invest in children's food. We don't invest as much in children's health. We don't have universal health insurance. We don't have elder care. We don't reform Social Security, even though we know how to. I mean, the last 30 years of the federal government has been, here's a big list of things that we're not going to do. Sometimes optimism just knows from coming, hey, we could do them. And it would be good if we did. And so the idea that we would get worse as opposed to better, for me, I think is not that much of a leap. And then the corollary to that is being cynical is a permission for your leaders to not try. Optimism is harder for them to govern because you demand more when you expect more. So expect more. I mean, we have said on the show, you need to be optimistic for no other reason than your congressman does not deserve pessimism. Like if you hate Congress, be optimistic about the future because that means that they have homework to do. When you're pessimistic, it's like, yeah, I don't have to try. I'm Congress. Nobody believes in me anyway. Well, you know what? Not anymore.
I love that. Yeah, I there are all these different definitions. I describe an optimist as someone who thinks tomorrow can be better than today and that they have a role to play in making it so. And so, and then once you go cynical, once, young people turn cynical and, it's the old Henry Ford, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And, once you think, it's too late on climate change or democracy's doomed or all these things that you hear all the time, then you are doomed. Or, once you get to that point, why bother?
Well, I also think Americans at their core are deeply optimistic, idealistic people. You can see that in like the type of leaders we elect. We're like, yeah, we get upset and mad about stuff. And so we elect a Trump or a Nixon. But like, we also fall in love with our presidents. And you end up with like a Kennedy, right? You end up with like a Reagan, people who like, it's not just that it doesn't even matter what kind of job they did. We believed in them. That's very special. Americans have, we have an idealism kind of ingrained, and maybe it's like a reckless lack of knowledge about the actual possibilities, but it doesn't matter. It manifests the same way. We try. where there's something not practical, but at the same time, very hopeful about our national character. And so we've also joked on the show, just because I'm optimistic, it doesn't mean I'm nice. It doesn't mean I'm naive. I am clear-eyed, mean, and hopeful about the future.
Yes. Well, I think some of that American optimism, I've often said, I think there's no one more optimistic than an immigrant. To leave, to go to a straight, mine came from, a lot of them from Ireland, during the famine, on these rickety boats, not even know if they're going to survive the way over. You have to have, obviously you're leaving something awful, but you have to have this sense of optimism that, what you're going to is going to be better. And I think that runs through so much of our history and our DNA, and even to be optimistic that you could throw off the British Empire, 250 years ago. We've had a screw loose on it, but it's a good screw loose, I think, that's helped us. And that's part of my passion, is making sure that we don't completely extinguish that we have to keep saying, okay, it might be 2 steps up, 1 step back, but we've got to keep moving forward. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, Bert Jacobs, who co-founded the Life is Good company, he told me he loves to challenge people. He says, bring me the list of history's great pessimists. And he's like, no one's done it yet. The world has always moved forward by people who had this vision that things could get better. And you're doing that in as an economist.
I mean, I'm like, let's do some bar bets here. You tell me something you're depressed about, and I will find a moment in history that was 10 times worse.
Oh, I'll do that with anybody. And you, okay, I'm going to go there. You had a really interesting conversation recently about the greatest generation. And so for our listeners who don't know, I think Tom Brokaw coined that expression.
Yes, although I said that, and a listener told me that there was like a congressional testimony. It had come up before,
okay.
And I think
so
that
he made it famous.
It was like someone had described them as the greatest generation in isolation and a one-off. And when he was researching about them, he heard that, and then he adopted as the name and popularized it. So that's doing it bigger and better is a version of inventing something.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the World War II. People who fought in World War II came back, built the middle class, the comeback in the 50s and all that stuff. And the reason I think this is important is because we over-glorify the past to our own detriment, I believe. There's a guy who's in the Algonquin Round Table, Pierce Adams, who said the thing that counts the most for the good old days is a bad memory. And we tend to over-glorify things that happened before us, and then that darkens our view of today. And so I think you read a book about this that basically said, yeah, they were, I'll always defend the valor and fighting and the sacrifice of going to war and all that stuff. But this idea that there was this set-aside generation who was just head and shoulders above everybody else. And because of that, the ones who have followed, the boomers, the post-boomers, were all just worthless and weak. I went on too long there, but is that something did I say that right?
Yeah, you did. I mean, that conversation, the thesis of that conversation is we are in this like cultural renaissance of hating on the baby boomers as ruining the economy. And the point of that conversation was to say, who benefits from you deciding that a group of people have ruined the economy? The people who have actually ruined the economy. And most of the backlash against boomers is in fact a backlash of conservatism that they are attributed with. Like, you don't like, the idea is that they took houses and they took government investment and then they turned it into tax cuts and now sit on their houses. And it's like, well, okay, it sounds like your problem is with tax cuts and zoning restrictions and not so much with the people. Like I also think that we, pile on baby boomers as a way to get people ready to cut Social Security, even though they don't want to. Like, I don't want to cut Social Security because I'd want it, but I'd cut it from a baby boomer who I've been taught to hate. So we wanted to open up this conversation to say, boomers aren't villains, and that in part you have to understand that the greatest generation weren't the heroes that they were, and that there's mythology playing on both sides, creating a villain, creating a hero, and mythologizing both sets of people does a disservice to both. And really, they're just like us. The greatest generation, the boomers, it was just people trying to figure it out. And the book that I read it was written by Kenneth T. Rose, who was a sociologist, and it was called Myth in the Greatest Generation. And it just walked through kind of the thesis of Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation, and just picks it apart with data and evidence to say, this is not who these people were. And what's funny is we take clips of Optimist Economy in the conversation, we put them on social media, and we actually have an incredible social media following for a show that's less than a year old. But the Boomer episode was particularly hilarious because there's a clip of me saying, boomers aren't that bad. Your problem is with conservative economic policy. And all the comments are like, they are that bad. And then I would have there's a clip. The first comment was, okay, boomer. I was like, y'all, I'm 40, ease up. And then I had a clip that was like, the greatest generation was heavily mythologized. And we look back to this period for a set of people that, didn't exist. And they're like, how dare you talk about my grandfather that way? I mean, it was hilarious on some level, but also is just, at our core, we like the myths.
We like the myths. And as you know, this has happened every generation, venerates the ones before and then puts down the ones in the pipeline. So I'm 60, you're 40, and people my age, your generation, what are you? I could lose track. You Y, X, what are you?
Oh, I'm millennial.
So millennials are lazy and they're cushy, and then don't get me started on the ones after that, because all they do is watch video games, and that's been going on for generations, and it's not healthy. And I tell people my age, if you want to feel better about the world and more optimistic, spend time with young people, because there's a lot of can-do optimism. They're pissed at us for leaving them a mess, and I'd argue every generation leaves a mess for the one that comes later, and that's part of your job to clean it up. But they're at it, and their hearts are in the right place, and they're working harder than we think. And so I think it's really important to use that, not just to make the boomers look better, but to realize, every generation has its differences, and they're responding to externalities, and we're all good people. How about that?
Yeah, or we're all bad people in the same way.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun.
And that, I think the upshot for many people too is you cannot effectively address a problem if you don't adequately diagnose where it's coming from. So like blaming boomers for being piggy capitalists that have all the resources in the economy, what's the solution there? Kill them? Like, that's not the problem with the economy. And the fact, and focusing on that isn't going to move you forward. Deciding that what's wrong with the labor market is young people are lazy is equally detrimental and equally wrong. The labor market is not strong because our economy is not strong. And we are in a unique period in American history. The labor market has almost never been this bad for young people outside of a catastrophic recession. So what do you get from calling them lazy? You're going to miss. So I try to stress to people that being able to cut through these narratives and build new ones is not about deciding which group of people you like or don't like, but it's about getting us to the right place. We won't solve a problem if we decide to blame someone else for it and attack them. And that blame someone else for it and attack them, like, childcare. It's women's fault for wanting to work, right? We're blaming them for the problem, which turns out selling the care of children isn't sustainable or advisable. But we're going to blame them for it, so we don't end up solving the problem. That's the through line there is optimism. When you actually get to the source of the problem and the solution, the optimism abounds, because there are so many great problems to solve that we know how to solve. We just need to be able to move past these really destructive narratives. And so we took to the microphone and turned the phone around, because bringing those narratives to people That's if you have the ability to do that, you need to. So that is why we started the show.
Beautiful. So let's talk. Well, I'm just going to steer people to the show. It's called Optimist Economy. Your co-host is Robin Rousey. Does she pronounce it Rousey?
Rousey.
And you're a great team. She's an editor, which we joked before we started. I could probably use one on the show at my side as well. It's weekly. You drop on Tuesdays, I think.
We drop on Tuesdays.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes. And we try to bring some levity to optimism and cynicism. And we try to just make it informative, but still find that silver lining. And we have gotten some hilarious reviews. We've been doing this for 1 year, and we've gotten some hilarious reviews since then. But the thing we hear back the most is, I didn't know how much I needed this, and how much it helps me to kind of cut through the mire that the news cycle puts us in, to think long term, we're going to get out of here. And so we've loved every review like that we got. We've absolutely loved.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing it. I'm so glad you took the time to be on this show. And everybody check out Optimist Economy. Kathryn Edwards, thank you so much for your time and for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you again for having me.
Kathryn jokes that sometimes optimism comes from a low bar. And like most humor, there's truth in that statement. And I really liked her line that optimism is hard to govern. Regardless of your thoughts about the decisions of your government officials, responding to them with a hopeful optimism is a powerful tool. And I loved it when she said, calling on her knowledge of history, that her bar bet is telling someone that if they share something that's awful about today, she can come up with examples of times that were way worse. Absolutely. And understanding that we've had a pretty low bar in the past can keep us optimistic about our future. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Kathryn Ann Edwards. Before you go, please consider leaving us a rating or review. We'd really appreciate your feedback. This and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics, and that's Crush with a K if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.